You're watching LTV, Comcast 34 and FIOS 26, Livingston.
Good day, Livingston, and welcome to Clergy Corner. I am Dan Martian. I'm pastor at the Presbyterian Church of Livingston and your host. With me on the show today, we have Reverend Susan Gillespie from Trinity Covenant Church, Reverend Dr. Richard Vossler from the Grace Lutheran Church, Rabbi Faith Joy Dentowitz from Temple B'nai Abraham, and Monsignor Thomas Neidinger from St. Philomena's Roman Catholic Church. Welcome, my friends. Come what may, the Ten Commandments are here to stay. They're also known by different titles. 10 words are Decalogue, 10 verses, and in Hebrew, Faith Joy, what are they known as?
Aseret Dibrot, the 10 utterances or words. Dibrot, the Hebrew root of that word is daber, to speak or to say something, or word, matter. So they're the 10 utterances of God.
What significance does the 10 Commandments, the 10 words, the 10 utterances from God have in your faith tradition?
They are core. I mean, in many synagogues you have the 10 Commandments as part of the Judaica, part of the artwork that are put up in the sanctuary or put up in a significant place in the synagogue, and they're part of the core 10 Commandments that we follow, that we want to observe. So they're very significant in Judaism.
What about in Roman Catholicism, Tom, as far as the significance of the 10 Commandments?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the Roman Catholic tradition, they are very significant. They're very significant in that, we certainly are very conscious of our Judeo-Christian heritage or tradition, and certainly the Ten Commandments play a pivotal role in God's relationship with His people. And so they have never been seen to lose their power, their force, or their ability to show us how to live.
And there's different numbering for the 10 Commandments. The research that I was doing for preparing for the show today is that the Lutherans have a different type of numbering, the Roman Catholics have a different type of numbering. Us Protestants, I believe, have a different type of numbering, especially the Reformed Church. And so it's the numbering that they do have, and I was kind of confused. I'm thinking, why in the world are they doing the renumbering? I was interested about the Lutherans. Why did the Lutherans kind of renumber this whole thing? What was Martin Luther thinking about?
That one I kind of wonder that too. I mean, well, looking at, I can understand the one where you take, thou shalt have graven images. That goes in with the first one in our tradition. Thou shalt have, thou shalt have no other gods, includes thou shalt not have any graven images. That we see that as being together. And then it goes down to the very end, the 9th and the 10th commandments, where you've separated the thou shalt not covet your neighbor's house versus thou shalt not covet your neighbor's wife, manservant, maidservant, ox, cattle, everything that is your neighbor's. Actually, that's a good question. I'm not sure why they had done it that way. But if you look at the tradition from it's in two different places within Scripture. It's in Exodus chapter 20, and it's in Deuteronomy chapter 5. Mm-hmm. And this one goes closer to I believe it's closer to the Deuteronomy chapter 5.
Oh, okay, so that's the interpretation of it. Sue, what about you? What significance does the 10 Commandments hold for you?
Well, the Ten Commandments being part of one of the main covenants between God and Israel, and therefore God and humanity as embodied in Israel, certainly foundational. But I guess I would say that that's part of the many covenants that God made, culminating in the covenant made in Jesus. So I want to be careful that in some ways I think we tend to hold the Ten Commandments up higher than all the rest of the things they're in context with. So significant, but not central.
I'd say great point, Susan. So, Sue, that the Ten Commandments are, we talked about them because they call them the Ten Commandments, and they're important commandments, but there's so many other important commandments. Love your neighbor as yourself from Leviticus, and so many other ones that we raise up and we use and talk about and follow as key to being good human beings and good people of faith as well. So, but it's easy to talk about the Ten Commandments because they have their nice little, their nice little tablets that they come on. So, and they are really important, but there are so many other ones that are also really important.
Yeah, and I'd break down the Ten Commandments into the first four is the relationship between God and us, and then the sixth in the relationship between other people. So it talks about relationship and what the boundaries or informs us or guides us in proper relationship. And I look at the Ten Commandments that way. I explain that to my congregation and to my confirmands about the relationship that it does. And one thing I really like about the Ten Commandments is that it brings the relationship of Judaism and Christianity together, because we follow both the law and dealing with that relationship and how that connects us as a people of God. Why do people have such a problem with displaying the Ten Commandments on public property? Rick, why do you think?
I think they look at it as being a religious thing. They like this separation of church and state, which does not appear in the Constitution. It's not constitutional. But even still, they want to say that they look at the Ten Commandments as saying, look at them as religious writings, and therefore something that should not be in the in government or in any place like that, rather than looking at them as historical documents from which different parts within the laws within our country were formed. If you go back through history.
Were they just part of the law? Sue.
I was under the impression that for some Jewish people, they don't even think the Ten Commandments are for anybody but Jewish people. Isn't there something about the Noahide code in there, that are somewhat similar to some of the 10, but that the 10 Commandments are actually a covenant with Israel, not with everybody, and therefore some people say, I'm not necessarily saying this is the way it is. I'm saying that some people feel strongly that the 10 Commandments, to put them up everywhere as though everyone can obey them, is to ignore the essential covenant relationship involved with Israel.
I think it's more the former, that it's a separation of church and state. And even though, Rick, you're referring to it as being a historical document, it's from the Torah. The Torah is a holy scriptures. It's a sacred text to the Jewish people, and it's from also, the Christian Bible as well. So you have it. It's in sacred text, sacred scriptures wherever you look at it. So it's not just a historical document. It's a religious document. And putting the Ten Commandments up in a public place would be a violation of the separation of church and state. So that's really the reason there's a conflict with that. So from the Jewish perspective, at least.
From the Jewish perspective, when it comes to some of these groups saying, well, we want to take down the Ten Commandments, and the Christian groups seem to be the ones that have a lot of pushback when the certain groups want to take the Ten Commandments down on public property. Is there pushback from the Jewish community?
I didn't understand, to take it down or put it up?
Take it down, because we're seeing people that have it displayed, like in courtrooms or even on court property, and then some other groups might say, well, the separation between church and state, and they want to go ahead and take them down. Is there a pushback? I know there's pushback from some certain Christian groups. I never heard the pushback from the Jewish groups.
I'm not aware of it. I don't think so, but it's definitely not from the liberal movement in Judaism. So,
my suspicion is that the reason people want them up isn't so much for religious reasons, but for heritage reasons. That even though we hold up certain ideals such as that, we have that statue out in the harbor, everybody can come, the Statue of Liberty, and the ideal that there's a separation between church and state and you have freedom of religion. Some people feel like they're being marginalized the more people who come here that don't share their heritage. And so they feel that by putting those front and center, they're making sort of a nonverbal stand for being a Christian country. And so I think it represents a certain amount of discomfort with change in our society.
I also think, I certainly agree with Rick and Faith Joy and that it is a separation of church and state issue. But the reality that the Ten Commandments are a faith-based document, they're a faith-based reality. But there's also some, I think, grounding to be able to say that there is some legal relevance that they have. They're displayed in the facade of the Supreme Court. So obviously our legal system, when that was being built, saw them as being some kind of vital role in the development of the legal systems that we follow. So I think they're certainly very, very relevant in terms of our faith, but I think they are relevant also to legal and those who are in that profession too, and what flows from them and what flowed into them. So, but I do believe it's separation of church and state, but I think, they are, and while they are a faith document, I think certain, the legal profession certainly, and the courts and the thing looks at them as being vital to their...
Yeah, they borrowed from the
they
Ten
see it as
Commandments
being,
or the 10 words.
central.
And to me, it's not so much of displaying them, to be caught up in, we have to display them. It's the meaning of the 10 words, of the 10 laws. What is the meaning of that? And trying to, maybe as educators and scholars, is to educate our people and educate people that it's not the displaying of it, but what it means and how do we connect. And if we think that they help us with relationships, then build relationships with people who want to take them or take the 10 Commandments down. And how could we go ahead as a faith community, how can we go ahead and foster some warm feelings? And because we have the separation between church and state, even with our coinage, in God we trust, what ways can we as faith communities kind of clasp hands and talk these things out where we can kind of foster relationships, we can build connections, we can say it's a deeper meaning. Tom, what do you think?
Well, I think looking at however we number them and however we categorize them, I think when you look at them as they're listed, or however, whatever the topics, I think what you said before was excellent, Dan, about the relationship, our relationship with God, our relationship with each other, and there are they draw very, very close to moral absolutes. Who's going to argue that killing is not wrong? You know what I'm saying? So they really get there. Certainly, and the stress on the importance for them for Roman Catholics in the Judeo-Christian tradition. We believe that Jesus Christ was the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. And that and we read in Matthew's gospel how Jesus says, "I did not come to destroy the law or abolish the law." But to do quite the opposite, so to see that every piece or every part of the letter of the law is fulfilled. So I think that for some they can use that to relegate it as a historical kind of thing, but it is not just something in the past. It's something that governs the way we live our lives today, and should strive to live our lives today, at least in a larger sense of the word. And we all have laws and rules that accompany. How many in the Hebrew tradition? How many laws are there? 613. So you might even have canon law beat in that. No, I'm kidding. But I'm just saying, they all support that. But those are just so central, at least for us.
Right, right. If we didn't have the 10 Commandments, what would replace them? What would replace them?
Are you talking replacing them within community, within society, or within?
If community.
If we had big 10 rules, or
Right.
just what would we consider the top 10 rules to have? Is that what you're saying? Or just,
Yeah, exactly.
It's a fun exercise with kids, right? Or adults, to figure out what are the most important rules to follow. The 10 rules. What are the most important things to follow? Well, it's a great question. think we still want to keep "Thou shalt not murder" in there, you know. And,
Yeah, right.
I think the advertising industry would want to get rid of "Thou shalt not covet."
right.
They probably think coveting is good.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the interesting thing is, as I know, at the time of Jesus Christ, a common practice was for rabbis and teachers to be asked the question, what is the most important law? And they would have these discussions that would, almost like what you're saying, Danielle, what would replace them, or the discussion, what is the most important? What is the most important of all of them? And it would be a kind of a educational, formational kind of discussion that they could have, and would really, really reveal where that rabbi is coming from in their perspective of that. So Jesus has posed the question, and what does he say? He doesn't refer to any one of the 10 Commandments. He refers to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the 2 greatest commandments, and they're really, really one, which goes back to what you were saying. So that's certainly, one might argue, a development, not necessarily a replacement, but a development.
And as we look at the 10 Commandments and we teach the 10 Commandments, what is the hardest commandment to teach people and help them understand? What do you think, Rick?
I would go with the first commandment. The one I actually.
Is
well,
this
I would
the
say-
Lutheran one?
I didn't even go before.
Double one.
No, I'd almost go. I would almost go with what we would call as the preamble, and I look at it actually as probably what you would call the first one. I would say, "I am the Lord your God." Yeah, and here, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. For those of us Christians, say, you know, I'm the Lord your God who gave you Jesus to forgive your sins and give you new life. And I would say, once you've got that, and you understand that, and understand from that goes on to the second, then from there all the others go on to it. Because of this, because of what God has done for you, therefore, this is how you act. You don't have any other gods. This is how you act. You don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. This is how you act. So, I mean, that's how I would answer it, is that once you've got that first one, and however you're going to number it, if you're just going to number it at the preamble one, or look at it as the first one, saying, you know, I am the Lord your God, that's the important one right there.
What about the second one that says, you won't have any graven images before me? And then, you know, in the Roman Catholicism world, I've heard this ever since I was young, they worship the statues. How do you inform the people that, no, you know, we don't worship the statues?
Right. We don't worship the statues, and we don't pray to what they represent. We pray to God. And
So they help you to focus on,
yeah,
and it's a
basically
visual.
it's a visual. It certainly is a visual, and it contributes to the imagery and the symbolism of the faith and what they stood for. Whenever you see a statue or you see a representation of a saint, usually they're either holding things or things are around them that represent really what was their great testimony to faith. Maybe it was their martyrdom or the instrument of their martyrdom or what they did. But they're images because basically, like stained glass windows and like statues, many, you know, in the history of the church when they became relevant, you know, it was an uneducated population. They couldn't read.
That's true.
And
yeah.
so you have images that sort of were used to teach, them stained glass windows and stuff that would really, you know, the mysteries of the rosary, we would say, were instruments to teach people, you know, and so it's being able to communicate something through images and contribute a devotion, but ultimately every one of those saints is basically giving us a way or an avenue to get to God.
Well, I know that in the Reformed tradition, which Presbyterians adhere to, we've thrown a lot, almost like I would say the baby out with the bathwater. Anything that has symbolism, or not symbolism, but would smack of idolatry, we would throw it out. You know, even pictures of Jesus, because we are afraid that would become an idol, and people would pray to, you know, our statues, and where it'll help focus. We're having the liturgical renewal, and this started back in the 19th century, where it helps us to focus. All the symbolism helps us to describe and to explain our faith. And but there were so many people that were so afraid of the idol and the idolatry that anything that would smack that, we especially in the Reformed tradition, we put that outside the church. And so the Reformed churches are very plain, and that's why some of the churches are plain. Sue?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons we have to be careful not to make the Ten Commandments so high in our faith. In the revelation of Jesus, we've seen that a whole lot of fear is not what's called for. You know, Jesus said to his disciples, "Don't be afraid," over and over again, and it has been argued that God himself transcended that idea of not having images by sending Jesus, who was visible to see, the image of the invisible God. So, you know, I think we have to be careful and recognize that we can't find some little slice of the Bible and say, this is it, right here. All you have to know is this. You need to know the whole story and ultimately have a relationship with God.
And that's what the Ten Commandments point to, in my estimation.
Sure.
How and why do we get away from very simple truth? And people, like you said, Sue, they seem to put up the Ten Commandments here, and we have to follow the Ten Commandments, which is, you know, guidelines and informs us on dealing with relationship. And we don't want to go ahead and say don't follow them, but don't hold them so near and dear that you can't look at the others.
One might say they've been flushed out in Jesus. Follow him. He's got the idea.
I think it's the symbolism. It's the Ten Commandments that they're symbolic of the fact that we're following commandments or following laws or rules. And as you're saying, so like it's not just one slice of the Bible or the Torah. We want to know more. So I think it's easy to hold it up. I mean, literally, when I was cutting a piece of a baguette for my son, and the top of it looked like, you know, the commandments, right? The tablets. It's easy to say, hey, here are your 10 commandments, because we're used to that imagery. So we know it. We know what they look like, and it's just the writing on it. So it's that they're really important, and it's that and more. So and what you were saying before about the rabbi saying, or was it Jesus saying,
or rabbis
what the rabbi saying in general, just you know, love your neighbor as yourself is such a huge, important commandment that we want to all practice wherever we are. So, and that's not part of the top 10. So, but it's certainly.
But isn't it implied in the top 10?
Oh, because it's about relationship, right? So that we want to have good relations with other people. So yes, we can say that it's implied. I guess you could say don't covet your neighbor, don't covet their things, but it's also we want for our neighbors what we have for ourselves. We want to love our neighbor as we also love ourselves. So kind of see all of that in there.
Yeah, I always think of it as a circular effect, not a linear, but very circular. How can you love God if you don't love your neighbor? How can you love your can you love your neighbor? And in loving God, so it's an both and type of thing. You can't love one with the other.
Where Sue mentioned, and it's something we haven't maybe mentioned at least so prominently, is the whole idea of covenant, the importance of covenant. So when we look at the span of salvation history, we see one covenant after the next between God and his people. You know, we might identify the covenant with Noah, then we could identify the covenant, the 10 Commandments being that first covenant. But, you know, in any covenant, there are two sides. You know, there are rights, obligations, and on the one person's part and on the other. So certainly the 10 Commandments and the other covenants represent what our commitment and what our responsibility is, but we can't forget also that on the other side of that, God is also promising us certain things, and he establishes a covenant that we have to keep that covenant.
And that's the preamble.
Yeah.
The preamble.
Exactly.
I am the Lord your God.
Right.
Yeah.
And from which everything
Yeah.
is based.
Yeah, I like the one in the Hebrew scriptures where it says, you know, the covenant, I will be your God and you will be my people. So the 10 Commandments informs us how, you know, I will be your God, and this is the way I want you to treat me, and then I will be your God and you will be my people amongst all the other people.
Yeah.
And in sociology, every law has society, or every society has laws, and how to govern themselves, how to deal with themselves. And this was just part of the society at that time. I look at the 10 Commandments as the constitution for the children of Israel. Mount Sinai, that's when they became a nation. And they had laws that would help them to govern.
It's a defining moment.
Yeah.
That defining moment.
Yeah.
So that looks at in
And
the Lutheran understanding of the 10 Commandments. Well, we look at it in three ways. That the 10 Commandments serve as a curb, as a mirror, and as a guide or a rule. They serve as a curb to prevent to keep society civil, I guess you would say, to keep, and that would be for all people, keep people civil, as a mirror to show that, hey, I can't fulfill it, and I can't fulfill them perfectly. I need help, and we look at that through Christ, and then through what Jesus has done for us, and then as a guide, in that it shows us, because of what God has done for us in Jesus, therefore, like I say, therefore, you will have no other gods. Therefore, you will not take the name of the Lord.
Right. Faith Joy.
I was just thinking about how Moses going to Mount Sinai and God giving the 10 Commandments, that's something that we reenact every year at the holiday of Shavuot, one of the 3 festivals, and which comes 7 weeks after Passover. With Passover, we celebrate freedom, but with freedom comes responsibility, and the responsibility is in God giving us these laws, these commandments to follow. And there's this notion that we received it there at Sinai, and that everybody who was there, whether living or not living, the past, the future, we're all part of this covenant, all part of receiving this. But also that each year, it's always kind of what we call progressive revelation, that you're still understanding, and you still need to receive it yourself and understand it yourself. So we have to accept this gift that God has given us, and understand it for ourselves and take it to heart. So it means to wrestle with it. What does it mean that I am God? To understand what our relationship is with God, if we believe in God, if people are doubting God, to understand what does it mean to going through all the commandments, but to remember the Sabbath and make it holy when maybe I'm not observing the Sabbath. So to evaluate all of the commandments and to keep exploring that as well, and to continuing with that, that we actually think about that every year, all the time, but at the holiday of Shavuot, when that's the time when it's considered when Moses
it's
went
the
out about
wrestling
them.
around. I think in a lot of ways, we as a nation, globally, also wrestle around with how to deal with other people and how to deal with other people with respect. And my feeling and my thinking is, how many of our laws are based on the 10 Commandments? Thou shalt not murder. We have laws that prevent murder. Thou shalt. There's the respect of relationships, marriage relationships. We have that. Thou shalt not covet.
Shall not steal.
How many of us would like to just go over and say, hey, you know what? I really like that. Stereo
snowblower,
system.
that snowblower.
Snowblower,
Really help
absolutely.
on the snowstorm tomorrow.
Right, exactly. And we have so a lot of our laws are based on, because a lot of our laws help us to deal with society and relate to one another, and we don't take advantage of one another.
And yet, as we are becoming a more diverse society, we're leaving some of those things behind. We're seeing some of those things become less important.
And maybe we need to go back every year and evaluate and review and wrestle around. What does the law means for us? Well, friends, thank you so much for being on the show today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us at home. If there's any questions or any comments that you have for us, please email them to livingstonclergyassociation.org. Until we meet again, may God's love be with you.